area plan. So hearing no objections, we'll go ahead and do that. I have a number of people who want to do a joint presentation in my first panel, but I understand not everyone is here. So I'll just figure out who is here. Catherine Parsons, are you here?
Yes, I am.
All right. And Gordon Stab?
Yes, I am, Mayor Nenshi.
Terrific. And Janet Giles Gillis? Janet, are you here? Okay, we don't have Janet.
Not here yet.
Sorry, was that Janet?
Sorry, that was Catherine. I was just confirming Janet's not here. She's
Okay.
at work.
And what's the correct pronunciation of her name, just so I know? Catherine?
I don't know how to pronounce her last name, sorry.
Janet. All right. Well, why don't I just ask you, Catherine, who is here from your group? That'll probably be a bit easier.
We have everybody but Janet.
Okay, so Jorg is here. And Brandon is here?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so understanding that this has gone on for a couple of days, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Parsons, and if you go a little bit over 20 minutes for 4 people, I'm not going to cause a fuss about it.
Sorry, Your Worship, would it be possible for one of us to read her section? We created the presentation together, and
Yeah, sure. Sure. Do you think you'll need the full 25 minutes?
yes, we would request the full 25 minutes.
Your
Worship, please.
Given how long you've been waiting, that's fine. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Parsons, and the floor is yours. And we'll put 25 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Okay, it's Gord who's starting.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Gordon. You can start, and then I'll just trust you guys to pass it amongst yourselves.
And one more item. We have a slide deck. It is titled Catherine Parsons, North Hill Communities LAP presentation. It was actually shown last night in error instead of the other presentation.
Oh, really? Does it start with the slide that says presentation outline, and then it says the petition, issues with the process, etc.?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We've got it on the screen. We're ready to go. Go ahead. Gordon, are you starting us off? We cannot hear Mr. Stab.
Sorry there, I had it on mute.
There you are. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Hello, councillors and Mayor Nenshi. Thank you for this opportunity for us to speak. My name is Gordon Stab. I own a home on 9th Avenue Northeast, and I am here today with 4 fellow Renfrew residents and homeowners. We oppose the development of 6-story mixed-use buildings along what the North Hill Communities Local Area Plan defines as neighborhood connector streets in the Renfrew community. We welcome condos, row houses, townhouses, fourplexes, and duplexes. When built appropriately, all these build forms can enhance our community. We also welcome minorities, renters, housing choice, and increased density. However, we are strongly opposed to the application of 6-story scaling. We want the Renfrew neighborhood connector streets to be limited to 3 stories with home-based businesses like adjacent streets. Our talk will go as follows: the petition, issues with the process, issues with 6-story buildings, issues with North Hill Communities Local Area Plan, possible alternatives, and closing. I first found out about the Local Area Plan by fluke in January of this year. Prior to this, I was not aware of the plan and its implications to Renfrew. I was astonished to find that the city's consultation process with Renfrew residents was complete, and that such a major change could happen in my community without my knowledge or input. Slide 2, please. We did our own form of community engagement discussing the local area plan with many residents along and adjacent to neighborhood connector streets. These residents are those who are concerned for their children's safety along the busy roads, residents who will be disturbed by the coffee shop patio next door, and who will be shaded by giant buildings. I personally spoke to 50 people. Of those, 45 had never heard of the local area plan. 48 of the 50 people signed the petition against 6-story buildings. That is a 96% opposition rate. Clearly, The majority of people we spoke with opposed the plan for six-story scaling on residential neighborhood connector streets and were not properly consulted. In total, we present to Council 353 signatures. 327 signatures are from Renfrew residents and homeowners, and 26 are from other communities, for example, Crescent Heights and Mountain View, and general community members. Most signatures come from the neighborhood connector streets, 8th and 12th Avenues, and their adjacent avenues. It should be noted that due to time constraint, we were only able to canvass portions of a few select streets. It is likely if more time was available and we were able to engage more residents, that many more signatures would oppose six-story scaling on Renfrew's residential streets. The majority of residents we spoke to oppose this plan. These 353 signatures come from a wide variety of homes: small bungalows, heritage homes, new million-dollar homes, duplexes, townhomes, and fourplex homes. Also, renters who worry about where they can afford to live if they are evicted from their home to make way for a six-story building. All signatories are concerned that the addition of six-story mixed-use buildings along neighborhood connector streets will drastically and negatively alter their community. The community motto of Renfrew is a community that cares. It has been boldly displayed on the large white hat sign of the Renfrew Community Association Center for the last 37 years. We care about welcoming our new neighbors. We care about increasing density, diversity, and sustainability. In his website discussion of transforming local governance, Councillor Carra said, "Neighborhoods are more than the people who live there." And he addressed commitment to community associations, business improvement, social institutions, community hubs, and to diverse social inclusion with particular emphasis on Indigenous reconciliation. We agree. We also recognize that the planning and building of a great community must include consideration of neighborhood architecture and of neighborhood history. We believe that limiting scaling to 3 stories on neighborhood connector streets, like the adjacent streets, will bolster community growth without negatively impacting Renfrew. The North Hill LAP unfairly targeted neighborhood connector residential streets for 6-story high-density development in Renfrew. This same amount of increased density, affordability, and housing choice can be accomplished by other means. Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Catherine Parsons, and I own a home on 12th Avenue Northeast. I will be going through our issues with this process. Slide 4. The North Hill Community's Local Area Plan was written and prepared through a 2.5-year process. It has completed 3 phases: discover and discuss, envision, evaluation, and is currently in the final steps of the realize phase. Throughout this process, the city heavily relied on feedback from a working group. We wonder whether property owners and residents from neighborhood connector streets were fairly represented within this working group. We can't imagine that a resident of a neighborhood connector street would voluntarily agree that a 6-story building along their neighborhood street is acceptable. If the 32-person working group are residents of neighborhood local streets, of course they will be happy with this plan. They are happy the 6-story buildings aren't on their streets. If you sum up all the people the city claims they made aware through all 4 phases, it totals 1.7 million. However, if that were true and targeted correctly, every single person in Calgary would be aware of this plan. Instead, when Gord talked to 50 people, 45 of them were completely unaware of the details. Those that had heard of the plan assumed that it didn't affect Renfrew since it was titled North Hill. Advertising the North Hill Community's Local Area Plan is disingenuous and not effective. Where is this North Hill? Nothing in the title would suggest that the plan impacts Renfrew. Nothing in the title would suggest that the plan involves 6-story buildings being built on quiet neighborhood streets. I have probably driven past a sign advertising the plan. Perhaps I received a postcard. However, I have no conscious recollection of any of those things because the ads did not seem significant to me. If the city really wanted to inform residents of their plan, advertisements overtly stating that Renfrew will allow 6-story buildings to be developed along neighborhood streets would have been much more effective. The evaluate phase is arguably the most important phase of this project, as it is the only phase where citizens are able to review the plan and provide their feedback. During the evaluate phase, the city's marketing resulted in only 3,950 involved citizens, including both active and passive participants, and only 900 engaged participants. Engaged is defined as the number of unique individual contributors. It includes people who provided input online or in person. Of those, 10% are from Renfrew. When you compare this to the number of residents who live in Renfrew, there is an involved rate of only 6% and an engaged rate of only 1%. We'd argue that the participation rate was so low because Renfrew residents are oblivious to this plan and its implications. We wanted to participate, but were unaware. How can the city claim that a proper consultation process was carried out when individuals who will be negatively impacted by their decisions are not adequately consulted? Why were there targeted Main Street and industrial workshops to specifically involve business owners, but nothing to target neighborhood connector residents? If we are subjected to higher level buildings than adjacent residential streets, it seems like the neighborhood connector streets should have had a separate workshop so the planners can engage with the people who will be impacted. Slide 5. Let's forget about the low involvement and engagement rates and review the evaluate process. From what we can gather online from the closed survey, it would seem that the process was designed to encourage citizens to agree with the plan. The first 7 questions all start by introducing a guiding principle, stating how the plan accomplishes the guiding principle, and then asking whether the guiding principle was accomplished through the plan. It does not ask participants whether they agree with the guiding principles or the plan. Slide 6. Moving to the next tab, the survey asked participants to comment on the urban form category and scale maps. The colors chosen on the map are extremely poor. How can you accurately comment on the placement of neighborhood minor and neighborhood local when the colors are virtually indistinguishable? The legend on the scale map provided no definitions for limited, low, mid, high, and tall. Who reads low and thinks 6-story buildings? When we read the evaluate summary, administration states that overall there was a general sense of agreement with the urban form categories and scale modifiers. What constitutes a general sense of agreement? We read through all the verbatim comments in the report, and that is not the sense we got. In particular, we saw many comments that were against 6-story buildings, stating that scaling was too high in residential areas. Administration noted that residents were concerned by 6-story buildings and then attempted to address it, not by changing the heights of the buildings, but by introducing step backs at or below the 4th story. This mitigating measure is insufficient, and we will speak more to that later. Thank you. And I'm going to read Janet's part now. Her name is Janet Giles, and she owns the home on 8th Avenue. She's going to go through the issues with 6-story mixed-use buildings. Slide 7. This is a neighborhood connector street in Renfrew. Our neighborhood connector streets are relatively quiet, 2-lane roads filled with homes, not major thoroughfares. The city planners would like to convert our neighborhood connector streets from this, slide 8, to this. Here's a picture of the same street with the bungalows torn down and replaced with a 6-story mixed-use building. We'd like to ask you whether you would prefer to live on the residential street or beside the giant 6-story building. Would you build a 6-story mixed-use building next to your own home? Slide 9. 6-story mixed-use buildings will negatively impact neighborhood connector streets in the following ways. 1, traffic. There is no denying that building 6-story buildings along neighborhood connector streets will worsen traffic. We are concerned about the safety of Renfrew residents, particularly children, with this drastic increase in traffic. 2, shading. If 6-story buildings are built along neighborhood connector streets, neighboring homes will be drastically shaded. Is it reasonable that homeowners will need to plant shade gardens where there used to be full sun? We don't understand why there are special provisions in the plan to prevent shading of certain parks, but nothing to protect residents. If you are in a park and there is shade, you can choose to go to a different area of the park. If your house is being continuously shaded by a 6-story building, your only recourse is to sell and leave your beloved home and community behind. 3, noise. We are particularly concerned about the noise from the proposed small-scale retail shops. Many homeowners in Renfrew do not have air conditioning and rely on opening their windows to cool their homes in the summer. What will they do when the 6-story mixed-use building that is next to them has a coffee shop with a patio and is constantly noisy? 4, privacy. How can you have any privacy in your home or backyard when you are next to a 6-story building? Neighboring apartment dwellers will be able to peer into your skylights. 2-meter fences are not high enough to prevent adjacent neighbors from being able to look in. 5, parking. Parking along some neighborhood connector streets in Renfrew is already crowded. How will the increased density of cars be accounted for? Where will visitors park? How will these new small-scale retail shops have parking for their patrons? 6, lack of community feel. We bought into a community. If we had wanted to live in a crowded neighborhood close to downtown, we would have bought admission. We purchased our homes on a residential street with zoning that allowed for small buildings, not zoning that allows for giant condos and apartments that make having a sense of community almost impossible. How do you meet your neighbors when there are so many people you don't recognize anyone? 7, property depreciation. We are concerned by how our home prices will be affected if this local area plan is approved. Who wants to live in a home next to a giant 6-story mixed-use building when they can buy a home 2 streets over with more residential building restrictions? We certainly would not choose to purchase a home that is next to a 6-story building or has the risk of being next to one. Newer homes will not be desirable to a developer as they are too expensive. Why buy the newer home on a small lot when they can buy an older, cheaper, smaller house that is on a larger lot? Now our homes are not desirable to families because of the 6-story building allowance, and they are also not desirable to developers because of the price. We are not alone in this. When we look along neighborhood connector streets in Renfrew, we see many homes that were built after the year 2000 that we guess are too valuable for a developer to buy, but will be less desirable with the addition of 6-story mixed-use buildings. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jörg Wimbert, and I live in Renfrew, and I will be talking about issues with 6-story buildings. Slide 10. Insufficient mitigation measures and platitudes. We understand that the plan attempts to mitigate the impact of large 6-story buildings on residential streets with a mandatory step back at or below the 4th story. Stepping back above the 4th floor will not materially decrease the negative impacts a 6-story building has on traffic, noise, parking, privacy, shading, and the changing community. This photo is of a 6-story building with a step back at the 2nd floor. Does anyone really think that this is a single-story building? It certainly still looks and impacts a neighborhood like a 6-story building to me. Slide 11. Administration also likes to tout platitudes in an attempt to reassure citizens, such as the local area plan doesn't actually change zoning, or there might not be a 6-story building next to your house. That is the maximum height, not the minimum. Or this will be driven by market demand. Or this change will not be immediate, it will be gradual. However, those statements, while technically true, provide us with no assurance. If a developer purchases sufficient lots adjacent to my home and has a proposal for a 6-story building that aligns with the approved policies in the local area plan, it will be supported by city administration. Why would residents be comforted by the fact that they will be living in a construction zone for the next 30 years as they're gradually boxed in and driven away by 6-story buildings? Slide 12. This plan will not increase equitability and affordability. Some present this plan as a way to achieve fair, equitable, and affordable housing, a way to open doors to minorities and those who are less fortunate. We don't see that as being the case. The buildings that will be torn down to make way for these new build forms are often the smaller, more affordable bungalows. Small bungalows are an inexpensive way for families to either buy or rent a home in Renfrew. By comparison, these new condo apartment buildings are expensive for the square footage and they do not come with a yard. While this plan certainly does not supply housing variety, additional housing variety, it does not provide me equitability or more equitability or affordability. If affordability and equitable housing was really a priority for the city, they should not have removed the Midfield Mobile Park. Slide 13. Developers will not prioritize development on main streets. The plan as it sits today provides little to no incentives for developers to prioritize the development of Center Street, Edmonton Trail, and 4th Street. 3 main streets of the plan that have very similar building scales to the neighborhood connector streets. For example, the building scale along the entirety of Edmonton Trail, with the exception of the blocks nearest to 16th and 20th Avenue, has the exact same scaling as those on our residential neighborhood connector streets, 6 stories. As an aside, we find it mind-boggling that the city of Calgary feels it is sorry, I forgot this. These main streets are currently underdeveloped and, if incentivized appropriately, have the potential to increase drastically density and housing choice while minimizing the negative impacts to existing residents. As an aside, we find it mind-boggling that the City of Calgary feels it is appropriate to place the same size buildings along Edmonton Trail, a major thoroughfare with 4 lanes and many traffic lights, as it does small neighborhood roads in Renfrew. Developers will not choose to purchase and demolish existing businesses on main streets when they could buy cheap bungalows along neighborhood connectors for significantly less money. With such a vast area of land that could be redesignated for 6-story buildings, we foresee developers purchasing land haphazardly throughout the plan area along neighborhood connector streets and plopping down 6-story buildings randomly wherever they can buy land the cheapest. There are no incentives for developers to prioritize development on the main streets. Slide 14. Density disparities between communities. Why is density concentrated in Renfrew, while Crescent Heights and particularly Rosedale have very minimal increases? One can't help but see this as perpetuating inequality, where the more affluent neighborhoods preserve their community feel and the less affluent, such as Renfrew, are compromised for the benefit of developers' profit margins and to increase generation of city revenue. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brandon Parsons and I own a home along 12th Avenue. Slide 15. Proponents of this plan will say the change is inevitable, but this change is too drastic. This change impacts Renfrew more than other communities. This change is not spread out equitably throughout our community streets. And why does this change involve building 6-story mixed-use buildings on residential neighborhood streets? We pulled out some Lego when we heard the city used it when making important scaling decisions with citizens. How can anyone feel that the scale difference demonstrated here is acceptable? The 2-story infill and bungalow are completely dwarfed by the 6-story buildings. Slide 16. Why can't the city's density goals be achieved with 3-story buildings? We are not against diversity or density. Let's allow 3-story residential buildings of all types on neighborhood connectors. This allows for housing choice and density while having the negative impacts of noise, traffic, privacy, parking, and shading when compared to a 6-story building. We also want only home-based businesses on neighborhood connectors. The commercial shops on nearby Edmonton Trail and 16th Avenue are all still within walking distance to Renfrew residents. Renfrew could be filled with 1 to 3-story single-family homes, duplexes, townhomes, row homes, condos, and apartments, while the main streets have the larger 6-story mixed-use buildings as they are not directly in the community. Please look at both scaling examples side by side. Which is more reasonable? The vast majority of Renfrew residents and homeowners would prefer to live beside a 3-story apartment building rather than a 6-story one. Slide 17. We would like to express the frustrations and helplessness that I and so many Renfrew residents feel. We do not feel heard or acknowledged. To hear how Councillor Carrad diminished our time and efforts in his closing remarks during the PUD meeting on February 3rd was discouraging and doesn't give us confidence in this public hearing process. He said, and I quote, "I heard no material, I heard people who were misinformed, and I encourage you guys to realize this is actually in our community's best interest, and I heard people who were afraid." End quote. Nothing material after listening to the public all day? What misinformation did he hear? It is irrefutable that building 6-story mixed-use buildings will cause issues with parking, increased traffic, noise and shading, and decreased privacy. These are facts, and the issues aren't materially mitigated with building step-backs. Property depreciation could be considered conjecture. However, can anyone refute that a newer home next to a 6-story building is worth less than the exact same home on the street 2 blocks south with more reasonable building restrictions? How much less is up for discussion? 20,000, 100,000? No matter the answer, it is likely a significant hit and impactful to my family. And as far as the fear that Councillor Carrad is picking up on, while his tone implied that the fear is unfounded, we think that residents of Renfrew have every right to fear that this plan will have negative, drastic, and long-lasting impacts on our neighborhood streets. Slide 18. We acknowledge that city administration is also frustrated these objections are coming up at the last minute. Believe me, we wish it were otherwise. We feel very frustrated We were not aware of the implications of the plan earlier. I would definitely have contacted the city planners and tried to alter the plan before it got to this stage. Approving the plan because it has been in the works for a number of years and people have worked hard on it is not sufficient grounds for approval. This plan is not equitable to Renfrew residents. It is not widely known and not widely accepted by residents on impacted streets. We have supplied an alternative that would still increase density in Renfrew and provide housing choice while decreasing negative impacts on existing residents. 6-story mixed-use buildings are not a small incremental step change, nor are they a reasonable addition to residential neighborhood streets. The middle ground of a 3-story residential building is much more palatable. Yes, we would still be subject to more noise, traffic than a bungalow, but it would be half as bad as the issues from a 6-story mixed-use building. We think we are being reasonable. We are not asking for exclusivity or RC1 zoning. Let's welcome new neighbors, increase diversity, density, and equitability. Let's just do it in a way that is acceptable to residents. Let's come to a compromise where everyone can still enjoy Renfrew instead of a plan where density increases are such a huge detriment to some of our existing residents. Slide 19. In summary, we'd request the City Councilors amend the plan to allow only 3-story scaling and home-based businesses along neighborhood connector streets. Ask yourself whether 6-story mixed-use buildings on residential neighborhood streets are reasonable and if you would want to live beside one. In our experience walking and talking to residents in Renfrew, the majority do not want to have our neighborhood connector streets altered by 6-story mixed-use buildings. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, folks. That was a great presentation, very specific. And I will tell you my favorite part, will not surprise you, was the Lego. Thank you all. I don't see any questions for you, so I am going to go to the next panel. So do we have Tim Clotton? All right. Do we have Les Selly? You'll have to tell me how to pronounce that if you're with us, Les.
Yes, that is Les Selay.
Selay, I wasn't that bad, eh?
Fairly close.
Okay, so I'll put you as the first person in the next panel, okay? Megan Waldy, are you back with us, Megan?
Yes, I'm here, Your Worship.
Okay. Madeline Bemrose?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're going to be third. Kelly Page?
Yes, I'm here as well.
Thank you. You're going to be fourth. And Ian Lockerbie, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, so you're going to be fifth. And I think what we'll do, well, we're 3:09. Council, would you prefer to take your break early or finish this panel before the break?
Let's do a break now.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Then we won't be anxious during the break. So folks, we're going to take a half-hour break and we will come back with that panel. We'll be back at 3:50. Thank you.
Your Worship, I think that's a rough thing to do once you've just lined up a bunch of people to speak.
Yeah.
Can we find out if the panelists are able to come back in half an hour before we
of the five? Yeah. So I'll just do that right now. Of the 5 panelists I just identified, are you all available to be back with us at 3:40? Is there anyone who isn't, I should ask? Is there anyone who's not available to be back? Okay, we'll do that now. That way I don't have to break in the middle of the panel. Okay, and I noticed Councillor Collier-Card said that comment about Lego diminished the presentation. Oh, I don't think so. I actually thought it was a beautiful way to talk about spreading density. It looked great. Anyway, thank you. We'll be back in half an hour.